This is the Share a Voice podcast, presented by Look Left Marketing. In each episode, we talk to the smartest B2B leaders to tackle the most pressing marketing challenges. Here's your host, Look Left Senior Vice President, Jennifer Tanner.
Today, I'm joined by Serena Ehrlich, Director of Go-to-Market at Notified. Thanks for joining us, Serena.
I am so excited to be here.
In case our listeners are not familiar, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about Notified?
Absolutely. So Notified, and it also Notified owns Globe Newswire. We are a communications company. So basically at our core, what we do is we work with investor relations teams and PR teams to help them communicate their messaging to their street. We are a storyteller enabler, if you will. And so that means we have investor relations tools like webcasts and IR website hosting. And then obviously with Globe Newswire, we have a full distribution and regulatory filing section. So I work on the Globe Newswire, the PR side of the house. I'm all about news amplification and getting those press releases disclosed and seen by the right audiences.
Excellent. Press releases is what we'd love to talk about today. So let's start off with true or false. Press releases are dead.
Okay. I have a story. So Tom Fermesky is the one who made that quote. So of course, when I ran into him on the street in San Francisco, he immediately apologized. And what he said is that every single time somebody sees him, they state that quote back to him. And he said he wished he'd had a bigger platform to say he never meant that they were dead. And that really was not true. That in reality, it was bad press releases are dead. The spray and pray is dead. And what's funny is he said that, like a decade ago, more than a decade ago. And his main concept is still today's biggest challenge, which is press releases are highly valuable tools, but people don't quite know how to use them. I mean, press releases sent over a newswire are not Word documents. They're electronic news packages. If people start to think of them differently, they can create a different release. And then if they really think about that, then they've got trusted distribution, trackable inbound traffic. They're reaching the platforms. And then suddenly the press release becomes the most valuable content piece in a launch. It is the most visible piece of a launch. So this idea that it's dead is literally the silliest thing ever. But I love the fact that I'm not the only one who thinks that.
Let's talk about some maybe misconceptions that people have with newswires specifically.
I have a whole stack of misconceptions. I think the biggest misconception, and what we hear all the time, is one that all newswires are the same, which is just not true. That's like saying all automobiles are the same. The basic concept is the same, but the differentials come in with relationships and with technology. But getting past that, what really happens is that they don't think that all newswires are the same. A lot of people think newswires don't work, right? I just use it to get on the web. It will never generate editorial coverage. And again, in reality, it's the most visible content piece on the web of any launch. All the wire services provide reports to showcase, and it's just a sampling of the views. It's maybe 20% of the actual full reach, but they give you a sampling. And here's the thing, nobody opens a press release unless they care. It's not like advertising, right? So press releases and the traffic they generate is extremely highly valuable. And then press releases have off-ramps, so that traffic can come into the website. So this concept that a newswire doesn't work almost always boils down to, I don't know how to tell if it's working. And so with that, it's about, there's a better product. A news release is only as good as the news in it. And sometimes a company can't do anything about that. And sometimes a PR person could write it better or format it better or add images. And that's the differential. The other thing is that reporters don't use newswires. And this is a really big deal, because if you had said this 10 years ago, when Google was all the rage, right, 15 years ago, I might have agreed with you. But the biggest thing that's happening now in media is this shrinking landscape. And with that, the second thing is fake news is huge. I work for a newswire. Like, we know what we're talking about, and we know what the reporters are dealing with. So when it comes to email pitches, they don't know all the time who sent them that note. if they're a real person, if it's fake. But when it comes out over the newswire, they do. So we're actually seeing higher reliance on newswires, and then we actually see coverage. We always see coverage sourced by Globe Newswire today in a press release. So we know reporters are using it because they value our vetting service before we allow someone to use our product, and they rely on that. So that's the two biggest things. The third one is that people think news press releases are Word documents, and they're not. When they go out, they're actually digital content pieces. So if press releases, when we craft a press release, if we think about formatting, if we think about word choice, just like we do with blog posts, you actually get a higher readership. And we know this because a formatted press release with hyperlinks, when people are clicking the links at the bottom of the press release, that means their eyes read more. That means they're more educated. They got more out of it. So that would be another big misconception, is that the Word document that's being created is a press release. Oh, and then the last thing, and then I'll stop, is that news releases are just for breaking news. Globe Newswire, when somebody issues a press release on us, it's going into search, but it's also going into AI and LLM models. And that's where buyers are. So it was a lot there. It was really just for news releases are not dead. They got to think about it in a new format, in a new way. You've really got to think about what you're sending out, and then you got to know how to track it. But in reality, reporters are relying on it. We're seeing much more coverage from releases.
Yeah, let's drill down into some of those points. You mentioned looking at content a little bit differently. Last year at Look Left, we saw some companies experimenting with news wires to publish, like you said, content or like a blog post or a byline almost versus news or the typical structure of a press release. Do you see this as an emerging trend? Does it work? Is it something that you encourage?
I love this question. Okay, I used to always just say yes. Oh, yeah, for sure. That's what I think. That's how I feel. But we actually did data. We did a big research project internally that launched this year where we took multiple 10 or 20 low-trafficked blogs, and we used the press release to drive traffic to those blogs. And we got massive inbound traffic. It was a huge success. So I think that when people think about content pieces, the reason it's important to use a wire service and the value that comes from that wire service is, one, we are seeing more inbound traffic going back to the landing page. But the other thing that your clients did that's super smart is they got that data ingested into LLMs. So if somebody goes in and asks a question that's covered in a content report versus a press release, right? That's more buyer-oriented, perhaps, maybe moving people through the funnel, trying to own your market share narrative. You really want both of those places, and that's great. So the nice thing about a press release is that when it crosses the wire, the headline of the press release is your top SEO. Let's say your number one buyer issue is X, and you have a blog post, you have 6 blog posts about X on your website. You could do a content piece. X is in the headline, so already you're going to start to get into that market share. And then you outline the value of these pieces and drive the traffic in. You're really getting to own that buyer market as well as the reporters.
That's so interesting. Is there anything else related to SEO that people should know about using wire services?
Yes. Ooh, yes. A few more things. So this idea that all wires are the same, one of the big reasons that they're not is the structure of the press release. And then the tools that the company offers that allows you to optimize that. And obviously, I work with Globe Newswire. I worked at other wire services in the past, so I do know that there's a bit of a differential on this. But for example, with Globe Newswire, if you use the release tags, it's a free feature that when you upload your release, you're prompted for that. Or if you add in the release summary, which is also a free feature, that information, those words, go into the meta tags of your press release. So now your meta tag is not just the headline of your press release, right? That's still your most valuable SEO. Visibility is right there. And when I say SEO, I do not mean inbound link juice. I mean search visibility, but that will be your biggest. And then these other terms help it appear as well. The other things that are extremely important for visibility is, one, your headline should answer a question. And I know we get that very often when we're creating blogs. We don't get that very often when we are writing headlines. If you answer a question, then you'll own the top of search in Gemini for the answer of that question. So you really want to make sure your headline does that. And then the second thing is you want to add an image. The structure for LLM and search is if imagery is available, it gets a little bit of a higher boost. With the Globe Newswire distribution on our distribution platforms, if you have a photo, you get twice the space. Just like with Twitter, right? The old days of Twitter, you add a picture, you get more room. So it's visual. And then the last thing I'll say about images, which is your best tip, is whatever the file name is of the image before you give it to us, that is what's searchable and it goes to the top of search. It's huge because today's humans, the SAT scores have dropped in the United States and around the world. Human language is almost deprecating. People speak in images. So what happens is when they're searching for Google is quite often they search images. So now your narrative, your news story, not only do you own the top of search, all search, but now you're going to own the top of images as well. So all you have to do is name it. That's on your end. You give it to us fully named with any words you want it to have. We got you.
To that point, your images, do you have recommendations for what to include with different types of announcements? Like a product screenshot with a product announcement, for instance, is that helpful? Or should you consider using something that's more like digitally created that has words in it and it's explaining what's happening in the press release, not just like a product shot?
Terrific question. So let's pretend you have your ultimate fantasy design team and you have all the resources in the world. Because a lot of people will use existing marketing pieces, their marketing image, and that's great because it's a really nice shot of the images. That's fine. But a earned media image is actually different than a marketing image. So if it's possible, what I like to do with what I call earned media visuals is, in fact, I always try to recommend that PR pros get a budget for that, is imagery that tells the story of the headline. The nice thing about visuals, the most important thing about visuals to remember is that especially images don't require translation. So they speak to a global audience, even if you're there or not, right? Even if your product's being sold there or not. So an image that will actually show the product. So for example, let's say I am selling Cassie's Word Quilt book, right? I got this book here that I'm trying to sell. The image of the cover obviously is super important. It's not going to have that. But if I could show, more importantly than that, a little kid picking that book up off the purchase shelf or pulling their mom's arm and showing their mom the book, way more valuable. And then what happens is in the background, you have a blurred version of your book so people know it, but the branding is very light. That is an earned media visual. So that is the thing that they want, right? So if you can pick your imagery, first off, right off the bat, photos over video. For press releases, usage and actually having people's reaction, photos always, in my entire 25-year career, have gotten the most clicks. You can always add more than one image or video. So image first, if you could only pick one, image first, an image that shows the product in use, the concept. A video is also useful. And then for LLMs, believe it or not, transcripts. A PDF of a transcript is very useful. More importantly, if you have it on your website, like this conversation on your website, if you post the transcript as well, LLMs pick the transcript up. So we're seeing that becoming an emerging marketing piece to add to releases for machines, not humans, is a PDF of the transcript, but the visual for sure. And then blue is the most popular color in the world. It attracts more likes and clicks, thanks to Facebook for that data, than anything else. So what we like to do, so to answer your very amazing question, was always include an image. Now, let's say you don't have an image. Back to your original question, stock art, make your own. I have companies that don't have anything, but they have something to say. Make an image with word quote. Let's say you have somebody that has spoken on a topic. Let's say you're a nonprofit and you have a really strong quote. Put that on a quote card and make that your image. Because again, when you name it, it's going to appear at the top of search.
Absolutely. You mentioned light branding on images. Do you suggest like putting a logo on the image for like ownership, or does that distract from the performance?
Usually, if the logo is too well placed, the reporter will think that this is a marketing gimmick. So if you have it a little further back, it generally shows the emotional impact first, and then they'll connect it to the image. And they'll say, oh, I feel so great. Oh, what was this book? But you definitely wanted to have it visible. To be very clear, the image, but slightly blurred, a little bit in the background or a little bit in the forefront, but definitely put there, oops, you caught that in the picture type.
So you mentioned that newswires are like a tool for marketing professionals, and I'm not sure that a lot of people look at them that way. How should we reframe the way we look at newswires and how they can benefit a company?
I finally created an image, and I'm going to tell you that it took me, believe it or not, probably 8 years to get somebody to make this image correct. So bear with me on this. When you create content, right? And I create content, so we're all in the same boat. When we create content, one of the things we have to do is we have to recoup our costs of that content, right? You got to make that content work for you in as many ways as possible. So you think about all the ways you can promote it, and usually it's your landing page, your own email list, your own existing tools. And that's where it stops. You might have a partnership with a third party, but again, that's something you already know. If you want to get beyond that in any way, shape, or form, the only way to do it really is a wire service. You can do it with Google, don't get me wrong, but I consider that to be part of your own scope. So a wire service is going to take that content piece and it's going to put it way past any place you could have gotten it. It increases that visibility. So then what happens is you have this marketing piece. And then the last thing is that not only are newswires highly visible, not only are buyers looking for them, not only are they putting information to LLMs, they're getting your story right in front of the buyer, but those inbound links, anybody who views it, if you put in a link to your website, a UTM, and collect that, and remember that they're coming in as the most qualified traffic possible, dude, it's a great way to test your landing page. Because I got to tell you, if you're not converting from that, it's a landing page issue. And that's another thing I will tell you, that they don't think about a press release as digital. And they don't think about confirming that the landing pages can work. They generally just think the release didn't work. So for a content marketer, how I would do it is I would absolutely build it in. I would look at which content pieces we have currently and which ones moving forward really drive and tell our story, our corporate narrative. Not every piece has to be supported, right? That would be nuts. But if you find your core pieces and you keep putting that out on the wire, you get to own that narrative. The last thing about a newswire that we hear all the time is that sometimes people, they see it on your website, but if they see it in a newswire, it's a higher trusted place. They view the newswire as the coverage you've received. It's your press release, right? But
yeah,
it's seen, because of the trust signal is so high within Google of press releases, it really does become part of your story.
absolutely. Let's talk about maybe some tricks or tips that might help with performance of a press release or newswire distribution. Do you have thoughts on timing, like day of the week, time of day, things like that? And then also like international versus domestic distribution?
I really do. A lot of the questions you're asking, these best practices, one of the reasons why there is such a narrative that newswires don't work is because there are over 200 inputs that can impact the success of a press release. And we get this all the time. Can't you just give me a baseline? No. So timing is one of the best. And by the way, I believe that press releases should be considered A/B documents. I think you should be viewing them as always be testing. And testing the time you send out a release is the easiest way to do it. So here's the problem with some of the time. 8 o'clock Tuesdays, avoid that like the plague.
Okay. Everybody is doing it at that time, right?
So what happens is, and everybody schedules it, right? So you have all the wires in the industry, and what will happen is at 8 o'clock, there will be 600 press releases will cross. How in the world are you going to stand out? Can you imagine trying to fight that? And then they all go out in microseconds. So the system just fills, and whoever's is visible is the one that's visible. So knowing that news moves in microseconds, changing the time of your press release from 8 o'clock to anything on the odd hour, I say, 8:17, 8:22. And then secondly, a lot of people will send out press releases Eastern time to align with the market opening. If you're not publicly held, don't do that. I've had California clients come and say, why don't I get reach? Their media's in California and they're issuing the news at 4 o'clock in the morning. So changing the time. So avoid your Tuesdays, avoid 8 o'clock always, and go off hour. Tuesday afternoons are fine. Wednesdays are great. Thursdays, even Mondays and Fridays are not bad. You just want to be sure off hour, unless the news is terrible. If you have bad news,
Hide it.
So to hide your news, do not issue it on a Friday. I'm looking you right in the camera. Don't do Fridays because it becomes what happens every time someone thinks, oh, it's a Friday, it'll be hidden. No, talked about Saturday, Sunday, and then your day 2 story is Monday, and now you've had a 4-day crisis. And we've lived through that. And then international, just very quickly, one of the things that people may not know about a newswire, like Globe Newswire, is that a lot of our clients want to build their brand and visibility in markets that they don't actually have a PR team or a comms team or even a local agency. Or they might have that, but that person has no resources. So when you use a newswire, one of the things like Globe Newswire, what we'll do is we actually translate the release for you. So that becomes the winning element. It's not only our relationships with the media, right? Because we can now take your press release, we put it into the media queues, we put it into the local search engines. It has your logo, it's easy to find, and now it's in the local language. And if you want to ever prove your commitment to a local market, you speak that language, right? So it takes all of that workload off. So for our agencies, it actually is a very easy build-in product, right? You can offer this global reach, but you're not managing that. We're doing it from start to finish. And then we also create with that, like we'll create glossaries. That's all part of the service. These are all just free parts of the service that we add in. So that's the big deal about building your brand internationally, is if you can do it yourself, but most likely you don't have either the reach or you may not have the translations. The last thing about those translations that I love the most, speaking about reusing content, is you get those back in-house. Put them up on your blog. You put them out in your own wires. You can put Google behind it. You could put it on LinkedIn. Now you're speaking that local language.
That's great. So we were talking about tricks to amplify things, get better performance. Can we talk a little bit about looking at performance? What metrics matter the most? How should people prioritize, and what do they need to know?
So there's a couple of things. So the biggest metric, again, the press release reports that any customer gets, this is across the industry, they're only a snapshot. That means you can't use them as specific numbers, but you can use it as a guidance to tell you, for example, what's going on and where your standards are. You can set your own baseline. You can take your last 5 releases. You can create an average open rate, and then you can test things out to circuit. So what are your top metrics? Absolutely open rate. And then you want to do it on your own. You want to search and make sure it's visible. That's something that's easier to do on your end. And then the last thing you want to do is you want to look at inbound traffic. Yes, you want to look at if you've got coverage. That's going to be an automatic one. But because that's not guaranteed for all of them, and really the biggest result you can get is to have someone do inbound traffic. So customers can use UTM links or URL builders from Google, right? And you can add that extension on. However, with Globe Newswire, this is something that most people do not know. With Business Wire and PR Newswire, most likely your URL tracker is going to be impacted. With Globe Newswire, it will be impacted unless you turn off our tracking. So that is something that people do not know, because people, again, they'll look at this. So the day of a release, looking at your inbound traffic to your core pages, looking at inbound traffic to your entire website. People won't click links. They retype the company name in the headline. And then in your reports, looking at your multimedia views and then looking at which of your hyperlinks people clicked. I had one client do 2 press releases, 2 exact product announcements, different flavors. In one release, they had 262 clicks. Their second release, they had 1,900 clicks.
Wow.
The differential was in the second release, they put links to their social channels. they put more hyperlinks in. The more hyperlinks and relevant links you add, the more traffic you can drive in. So that would be the last thing, is that looking at that inbound traffic and then going back. The last thing now, going back to tips and tricks. The literal best tip and trick you could do, other than hyperlinks, because that has to be there, and photos, which have to be there, is you've got to use Google Trends for your headlines. So what happens with Google Trends is real time, and it gives you the search term people use the most to find the news of any kind of news. So I did this for Procter & Gamble, and it's still my easiest example to tell people, is from a legal perspective, the team likes the word children, right? Procter & Gamble does mothers and children, right? Search it. So go into Google Trends, you type in the word children, and it tells you how much volume that has, which means it gives you an idea of how many times the release could appear in search. But if you type in the word kids, it triples. So Google Trends will actually help you pick the right word for your headline. And I'm talking about, what's a better word, announces or launches? It's announces. But if you literally could look at the words of the headline, people would see this all the time. People write headlines about themselves. If they think about the headline as it's got to attract the other person, and what words are they using, instead of using your fancy legal business terms or your product names, think about maybe using the industry term that the customer is searching. Changing that headline will absolutely change your result. Last thing, I'll tell you a quick story. I just got it this week, is I had a client who was we've been talking about this. They sent their release over. We gave them some ideas. They used our press release AI generator, which I hadn't even told him about. So I couldn't even believe the guy knew about it. He used our press release generator, and we said, how did it go? He wrote back, he's an analytical. He wrote back, he said, many more clicks. And this is somebody who'd never used this before. It takes about 5 minutes to use Google Trends. It's very easy. But even just going into AI and asking for an optimized headline will change your result.
That's so helpful. Quick question back to links. If I remember correctly, several years ago, it was looked down on to add a lot of links to a press release because it could impact SEO. What I'm hearing is maybe that's changed, or should people be using the feature? For instance, Globe has a feature where you can pull out links separately. Does that make a difference?
Oh, I love you that you asked this. So you're exactly right. Yes, you have to use the Globe call-out feature. And what that is that in addition to the URLs in your press release, you have an option to add in URLs, but absolutely be linking in your press release. Just make sure that the hyperlinks you put in are 2 key pieces of information that reader must have. So what was happening is people were just hyperlinking every term. And this is the thing about search terms and keywords and all of that, is no genericness is welcome here. You've got to be specific. Generic content generates generic results. So when it comes to these hyperlinks, putting it behind those specific ones, but we are also seeing a couple of things. I've seen LLMs recommend that you spell out your hyperlink, your website URL in text without a link behind it, a non-linked URL. Obviously, I can't test it because it's not clicked, but I've heard that. And then absolutely adding in these social channel off-ramps. The release I was talking about did use that service where you can add in your social channels. And imagine 262 to over 2,000. I mean, you have no idea how much research I did to find out why those releases are different, only to see that it was the number of links. What we will tell you about links is that there is this old story that newswires are SEO tools and that a hyperlink will be a backlink. That's one of the reasons why people were worried about spam. A newswire will put your press release on thousands of websites in duplicate. Back in the day, you would get credit for all of that and your website traffic would go up. That would be backlinks to you and you would be a star. It doesn't happen anymore. Google has us put no follow links. So even though your press release is on thousands of websites, you don't get backlinks from that. And that really eliminated both this content stuffing, and then it allows you to have all those links without getting in trouble.
That's interesting. When you say no follow, does that mean that Google can't recognize when someone does click and go back to the website?
No. That's a great question. No follow is just for the technical system, at least as far as I'm aware, just for the technical system. It's just for Google to understand that none of us are trying to content stuff the web
Got it.
and to drive backlinks. That fake backlink, that idea that a press release was the same as editorial coverage, that's what got Google in a lot of trouble back in the 2000s. And then they did the Google Zoo and Panda and all these updates to take that out. What was happening is all those duplicate content pieces were turning into backlinks. And then everybody was trying to use a wire service to drive backlinks. No more. Now, a newswire will get you to the top of search, and then it'll get you those clicks from highly relevant readers. That's your SERPs and your SEO. But yeah,
Perfect.
whew.
So what would you say is one feature that your clients don't use enough of, that it's there, it's in the system, and you just see that they could really be getting a lot more value, but they're not using that particular feature?
Oh, I will tell you that the biggest thing that people forget to do is order trade publications. When you upload your press release, you get to select your industry trades. And I have no idea why, but people will just jump over that. And that is where you're building your industry mindshare. That's your narrative owning right there. So just stopping and saying, and you can always save your order. So once you do it, it's there. But forgetting to order their trades is probably the biggest one. The second one is not including visuals, not understanding that there's literally not a reporter in the world who can write a story without one. But secondly, you get that huge space to engage and attract. And then the very last one, as I would say, is that they don't use their analytics. They don't open them. I can understand that. Like sometimes if you don't know what you're looking at, it's a little weird. But setting that baseline and then doing those A/B tests, changing the time you issue your release, changing where you put your company name. Is it at the front? Is it at the end of the headline? Look, this one guy, what was his one response? More clicks. That's all our people want, right? That's all our customers want. And so I think those are the big three things that hinder their actual success that they forget about. I think people know their headlines are important, but they forget to select trades.
Yeah, that's great. So we always ask this question at the end of every podcast, but what is one action that our listeners could or should take right now?
I think it's a big one. I think it's really sitting down and just rethinking it, the press release. Instead of a Word document, you have to think about this as a published electronic document. It's a news package. And I think if we treated even formatting, blocks of text does not work. We don't do that in blogs. Blogs are formatted. That has to enter the press release. I would say that the things that people do that hinder themselves the most is a headline that doesn't say anything except they're awesome, walls of text, and lack of an image. And the thing is, those are the three things that a wire service isn't going to impact that. We amplify what we're given, but those are the three things that they can do. And to me, that's super exciting. Instead of just being, we're not doing press releases this year. We're doing electronic news we got to think of a better name. I might need to hire you to think of a better name, but I think that's it. And I think when I started talking about Google Trends, it was 2013. So it's been 12 years and we forgot. In this time, so many other things came up we forgot. So that's going to be where it is that really understanding that symbol document is actually what's holding them back.
This has been really helpful. Lots of practical takeaways. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy it. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
This has been the Share a Voice podcast, presented by Look Left Marketing. Subscribe today at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more B2B marketing insight, visit us at lookleftmarketing.com.